Thank you. And thank you so much for your time. I'm excited to get to talk about this subject with all of you. And it's also really fun for me to be the final panelist because I feel some satisfaction in how some of the slides mirror the slides you've seen. So that's a good thing. um, I'm going to go ahead and share my slides and we'll jump into it here. So hold on a second. What happened? There we go. All right, everyone. So we're gonna go ahead and present. All right. So today we're talking about how to grow your readership and in addition, thinking about ways to generate revenue. And a little bit about me to get started. So I spend a lot of my time thinking about business and civic models for news. Right now, I'm thinking and researching and interviewing a lot around solutions journalism and collaboratives. And I'm very excited about that work. So if any of you are also curious or doing work that is related, I'd love to talk to you offline. I also produce a newsletter with a colleague. It's called Unpacking on Substack, and I do a fair amount of newsletter research. I started doing this work for a group called the Shorenstein Center at Harvard Kennedy School and have basically never stopped. We produced something called the Newsletter Guide a couple years ago, which is still pretty relevant and you might consider checking out. And we also have a Medium page with some of our information. So the course that we are running also in the next month or so is a free and open class that specifically looks at if you're thinking about starting a newsletter, what's the life cycle? And we answer questions like, how do I get started? How do I think about my audience? All the way down to when is the right time for me to end my newsletter and how do I do that? So you might consider checking that out if that's of interest. It started yesterday, but I think you could still get in. And now let's jump into it. So if there's one thing to remember with audience growth, it's kind of an attitudinal point of view. We would recommend that you know and then also emphasize your value add. So another way of putting that is, what is the thing that makes you different? And we know this in all types of like promotion and marketing, but the way it kind of clues in with newsletters in particular is it really offers a way to generate a more engaged relationship with your audience. So they know that when they are coming to you, they are going to get this very specific thing. And over time, this builds out such that you can then also, how do I word this? You can add on additional services that may also tether back to revenue streams and create this virtuous cycle. So, let's say your newsletter is about embroidery. You would be very excited to know that all around the world, there are lots of people who are interested in that subject. And so the benefit of a newsletter is it's a targeted method for you to reach those people. And so, when you are thinking about this, there's lots of ways you can go about reaching your readers with this very specific value add. This is a screenshot with plenty of things you could think about. Your website and your email are two really important pieces of real estate that are available to you. I'm sure we're very familiar with the benefit of pop-up boxes, but we've done research and they really work and they're not hard. Another one is popping it in your email signature and then, never stopping when it comes to on your website, putting it at the top in like a banner or on your article pages. You can also promo it. So that's an important thing. Referrals, you may be familiar with cross promotion. So this is something where, let's say you have a complimentary newsletter or it could be a different company entirely, but you guest post for 1 week. And all of a sudden you've had an opportunity to engage an entirely new audience and perhaps build additional goodwill. So that's an example of like a fun way to also engage your readers and hopefully build new ones. Social media, this is pretty straightforward. We're very familiar with this. Paid advertisements can often work. Of course, they require money and time, but But a simple thing you can do is participate in the conversation. So once you have singled out that subject, contributing as a meaningful member of the conversation will generate more interest, and people will want to know your thoughts. And finally, like when you actually produce your content, finding all the different ways you can to share that. And so, something that I think is really fun are book clubs. They're an example of a way you can build community and reach your readers. And we've seen some success with folks who've started book clubs from their newsletters, which is pretty fun because you're moving from the world that exists on your phone or in your email inbox to the world that you're reading in real life. And so the long and the short of it is sharing is caring. And I think journalists in particular have a very difficult time promoting their work. The reference earlier to the divide between editorial and business is something that we are very familiar with. I think there is a distinction here, though, that's important, which is that the more people who engage with your work, the more benefit and impact your work can have. And so when you get to actually start engaging and being really pointed about that, you'd be surprised all the benefits that can come from that. So a couple examples. I'm going to back up a second here. So Morning Brew, if you see the referrals, it's the third paragraph down, but that's an example of referrals. And Classifieds, this is a newsletter, Anne Friedman, and she runs a classified section. This is the pop-up box that I was referencing. This is Heckinger Report, which is an education nonprofit news organization that we work with. And then here is an email signature. You can see Joseph, he is a colleague of mine on the night class that I mentioned. And as you see, you can see at the bottom where he says sign up for Solution Set, which is his newsletter. So those are some examples. Now then, paths to monetization. Essentially, we're talking about ways you can make tiny bets become big bets. And here are some concepts to put in the back of your mind when you're thinking through this. We all know what it's like to wake up in the morning and have a cup of coffee. And historically, perhaps we read the newspaper in a print format, broadsheet. Perhaps we still do. But a lot of people are also reaching for their phones and scrolling their email inbox and reading their favorite morning newsletter. And this is a habit that can be very valuable as you talk to potential advertisers or sponsors, knowing things like how committed and loyal your readers are, as the earlier presentations were referencing, can be incredibly helpful. So thinking about the habits of your potential audience and your current audience is important. Next, experimentation is really critical. And newsletters are a great way to experiment because they're very flexible. You can, and I also think that because we are still establishing the relationship with readers, you have more of an opportunity to reimagine what that relationship can look like. And I think it is an opportunity to be more personalized, which can be a refreshing thing. And then, of course, we're familiar with the audience funnel, essentially like, how do we bring people down from web traffic into becoming a donor or a subscriber? So without further ado, here are a couple different ways to think about monetization. So we organized it into 3 buckets. First one here is business streams. And these are things to just consider if you are starting a newsletter, how you might want to go about generating revenue. Classifieds are a pretty easy way of generating revenue. You can build these fairly easily. And in the night newsletter course, we get into more detail about what that would look like. But they go at the bottom of your newsletter. And oftentimes they also generate additional value because your audience will then come into contact with new content that they are also interested in. So it can, like I say, be part of that virtuous cycle. And then advertising, we're very familiar with advertising. And sponsorship, which is, essentially saying, like, for instance, the Wall Street Journal having a logistics newsletter that is sponsored by UPS. So here's some examples. The classified sections, You saw that earlier. This is Ann Friedman's newsletter. For advertising, you can see this is the Wall Street Journal's COVID newsletter, and you can see the advertisement. And then the third example, Axios, you can see at the top, presented by Facebook. So the next bucket we want to talk about are reader streams. So this is like the revenue we're getting from the members and readers who we are writing with and for. So gifts and donations. Here in the United States, we're very familiar with this, particularly with our public radio. Paid subscriptions. The neat thing about this with newsletters is that you have a lot of versatility in how you want to put this together. There are tiers that you can play with, tiers of subscriptions. And then finally, membership, which often takes the form of like your super readers. These are the people who always show up, have the highest open rates, and they're the ones who want to be in the book club. So some examples. On the left, we have, for gifts and donations, you can see LAist. This is a newsletter in LA with a donation button. Paid subscriptions, if you look at the bottom, this is the New York Times. You can see the newsletter is free, but if you go deeper, you need to subscribe. And then membership, and this is the Nootropic, which is a newsletter. You can see in their language how they talk about this. You can have more virtual events, you can build more community, you can have exclusive content. So that's another option. And finally, the third bucket, we're going to talk about community. So this is like out in real life, in the real world. And we're likely familiar with merch. Merch is a little bit more difficult in that, it's physical. You actually have to ship it. There's definitely logistics to that. But also it's free advertising, which is fun and cool. Community events are a neat way to extend like the brand and the value add that your newsletter is offering. And finally, pop-up newsletters. This is obvious with the COVID newsletters, how valuable these can be. So merchandise on the left, you can see these examples. This is Dee's Links, which is a media newsletter that Delia Kai puts out. And she has these tote bags, which are pretty fun. And then Girls Night In is in the middle, and they do a great job of having community events. I believe they even have a Slack channel, and it's all built off of their newsletter. And then the Telegraph has the Good News newsletter, which was built during COVID. Sarah Ebner put this together and has had success with that. So that's it. I'm gonna pause and stop sharing. But it's, super fun. Great stuff.
No, this is good. This is great. Yes, that's why we're here tonight.